Welcome to our Vävstuga classroom and to our annual video exhibit of weavings done in the last year. Except it's really been a year and a half this time. We've had a lot on our plates. Last summer I was not able to do an exhibit in the barn during the summer the way I did in 2020. But here it is, February 2022, and this is our classroom that we've gotten to use for a whole year now. Very exciting. And when I did this exhibit before, if some of you saw that, you saw these warps on looms in our barn studio. And now, of course, they're done. These are some of our warps to go. So these were prototype warps for little tablecloths, which are available in our warps to go section. You can use two different reeds. These are actually the same warp, but look, you get two different sizes because you can have a choice of reeds, and that's a duplicate. Same here with the bigger warp. We offer this in a bigger warp. So there's the bigger tablecloth, and if you use a slightly coarser reed, it's even a bigger tablecloth. But maybe you have a loom that won't accommodate this cloth, and you can use the reed for the one underneath. So there's a lot of flexibility there. And on this little project, these are so fun. These are a bath set. So little washcloths, hand towels, and big towels. So cotton warp with a linen weft and nice absorbent, and hand towels to go with it. But you can get creative with these because take a look at these. This is the same warp, but woven with this brighter aqua color and in a pointed twill. So these are kind of fun. And we also did some prototypes for placemats, some nice rep placemats. And so there's one side and the other side. There's no right or wrong side, but you get two for the price of one. You can do placemats. You could do a runner. And we have one other colorway because we use two different kinds of yarn. There could be 16-2 cotton yarn, or you could choose to do it in 8-2 cotton yarn, which is a little bit heavier. They are both very nice, but placemats in rep are just always a lovely addition to the table. Our Vävstuga Basics class has been through quite a metamorphosis. In 2020, I had actually gone up to having 12 people in a class. We were so prepared. We had all of our warps done ahead for the whole year, except for the blankets. And then in March, of course, everything changed and we had to do something different. But what I want to show you here is these towels to start with. Is what we did with the leftover warps that we did not use for classes. And these orange towels, I ended up having to weave off really almost this entire warp. A few other people wove on it. But it was a color study. It was so fun to see what all of these different combinations of wefts can do on the same orange warp. And so I think now this is going to be a great teaching tool for color theory classes, or just people interested in how colors blend differently. And the green warp here is also another example of different wefts chosen. I still have a few of those to weave off, but this is where I'm at for now. And of course we did have some tablecloth warps left over. I should correct that. We still do have some tablecloth warps left over, which I have some plans for, but there was one, just the blue tablecloth warp only had a little bit left. And the block weave, many of you might be familiar with this, so I wove off the block weave warp. And here I made a runner, the same warp, alternating colors with the A and B block. So that was the unbleached 16-2 linen, and using black for one block and red for the other. This, believe it or not, is the same warp. I changed the tie-up so that one block could weave a twill, another block could weave a plain weave, And here I have this block weaving plain weave, but that one's weaving a basket weave. So I actually have multiple structures here, all just by changing the tie-up. That was kind of a fun experiment. And this is cheaty because these are examples I used in my basics class for many years. This is a previous block design, a very nice profile draft, but I finally hemmed them. So I'm showing them to you as finished items finally. I think this one I used in so many classes as an example of how to hem and how to make that look so clean and tidy with the pattern that you almost don't notice the hem. And so it was unhemmed for years as an example, but I finally did finish that. And this was yet another example of different weave structures. This is that plain weave, but then the other structure here is a broken twill. So it's a combination of plain weave and broken twill, but the same warp, same threading, just a change in the tie-up. And then in the summer of 2020, we did have some classes in the barn. We had to go from 12 people in a class to 4 people in a class, so quite a change. But this was one person that unfortunately couldn't come. I had to cancel, and there was a bit of blanket warp left over, so I made this blanket. But then, since things were all changing and different, what I did here, and these were also just what I did with some of the leftover warps, I made a video of my basics class as I had taught it for so many years. I've really developed it over 30 years. And so if you have that video, you might recognize some of these. There's the block weave that I demonstrate on. Here's the tablecloth I demonstrate on. And then we did have a purple towel warp, which we had students weave on last year, but there was a little bit left. And so I used that for the basics video. And of course, here's the little band. And the blanket, I had to do a new warp for the blanket because in our basics classes, we had 4 people on a loom. So it was 4 people on a warp, and there's a special way to shade all the colors, and we had all the skeins carefully planned as far as amounts, but I had to design really the same blanket, but with just 2 blankets on the warp. And in the video, I weave the first blanket plain like this, just with stripes, but then for the second one, I show really a fun way of designing the stripes on the quills on the table before weaving the blanket. And then you can just weave the blanket, and it's the same at both ends, sort of. And so that was quite a fun project. And now what we're going to do is show you what we're doing with our new basics class that's been redesigned with just 4 students at a time. And everyone really has their own loom, and there's a lot more flexibility, so it's a little different approach, which we're really enjoying, and I think the students are too. So now let's talk a little bit about the newer version of our Vävstuga Basics class. We have some blankets here. And so in this version of the class, you come without planning anything ahead, but then you choose your own colors to make your own blanket. So you have your own loom to make your own blanket, and you can see so many different possibilities. This one goes from blues to reds, greens. This one is more yellows, greens. You can stay in one family of colors. You can do any bizarre thing, and we have had so many different blankets come through so far. It's just wonderful to see what people do. And you're going to set up your own loom, so you have your own loom to work on the whole time. You're not always needing to either wait for someone or someone waiting for you. So it really takes a lot of the stress away from it. It's really fun. We're out in the barn and just having a great time learning a lot of things. Some of them are exactly the same as what we learned in the previous basics class and in the video, and some of them are actually different. So it's a big variety. I wanted to make this different so that if people take the basics class here and then do the video, you actually get a lot more material because it is different. And we were developing the block weave, and at first I started doing this as a satin weave on 10 shafts. And I actually, logistically, I needed to combine this project for the classics class and the basics class. So in the summer of 2020 we did this. But then last summer we decided to go a slightly different route with the block weave for basics. And this is an 8 shaft, but it's an 8 shaft straight twill. In my video I use a 8 shaft broken twill, and it's a different profile draft, and you can see all these different colors just blend differently with the natural warp, and here's one in 2 colors. And so the blanket and the block weave still happen, but they're a little bit different, and some of what you learn is a little bit different. We do a towel in plain weave, and so here it's a nice little towel in plain weave. It's a chance for everybody to try out the Lilla loom made by OK Snickery, and here's a nice little hand-woven band, so you get to weave the band on our Vävstuga Bandloom and try that out with the treadle. And then if you have extra time, I mean, you don't have to have extra time. You can spend a lot of time in the barn at night, or you can go home at night, and it's all fine. The timing works out. But if you have extra time, and these are examples of some leftover warps from last summer's classes where people had the time to put on a towel warp that they designed themselves. And now with Eva's help, we can pull out the tape and the cardboard and have a really fun time making windings on some evening. And then you get to actually review dressing the loom again if you get to do this, or even if someone in your class gets to do this, you vicariously get to see the loom dressing again, which is just a wonderful thing at the end of the week to get a review of that. And so we hope to see some of you here for basics in the future, and also partake in my basics video class. They're really 2 different classes, but some of the material is the same, some is different. A lot of my woven pieces are from leftover bits of warp from classes. So we're going to do a few of these from Swedish classics. There was a little bit of warp left over, and actually these 2 were the same warp. And then there's this one. So again, playing with colors, just using a different weft on the same warp. It makes a nice contrast. And so when people come here to weave on their linen tablecloth warp for Swedish classics, it can just give you an idea how you might want to be adventurous with your weft colors. And these had been a project I've done in Swedish classics. Some of you might have done these. Some of you might have done something else for satin. So these are a 10 shaft satin, a little square. And the last time I did this warp, it was a bigger one, and it was the burgundy. And so this is really the same pattern as this, but I've just added a lot of colors and little stripes in between. So it's just a bigger version of this warp here. I've made a change this year for Swedish classics. Instead of this 10 shaft satin damask, we're going to be doing something on the draw loom. So it's still damask, but damask on the draw loom, because we really do a nice damask in the basics class. And so that is that. Here is what I did with some leftover rose path warp. And this warp was actually from our Vev immersion class, the 8-week intensive that we offer through Fabric of Life. And I was kind of excited by all these colors. So this is something I'm planning to use in my Swedish Classics video class when I get to that. So you will see this reappear if the video class is something you're interested in. And what else do we have from the Vev immersion class? So everyone in the class gets to design a tablecloth, and some of the students combine. And so 2 of the students wove this. They put 2 tablecloths on, but then, no, they put 3 on because they put on 1 for me. And then 3 of our students from last year put on this tablecloth. They put on 4 tablecloths, they each wove 1, and then I got to weave 1. It's a really nice way to remember everybody that's come to an immersion class, and a little piece of them is here. And then we get lots of nice tablecloths here at Vävstuga out of it too. So it's always just so nice to see what other people design. They're such beautiful, beautiful things. This is just a classic damask tablecloth that we do in the Väv immersion class. When the class was longer, when it was 15 weeks, it was a bigger tablecloth. But now that it's an 8-week program, we do the smaller size, but it's still really a very nice cloth, and you get the experience of weaving with 16-1 linen warp and weft. Just such a classic piece. Also in the Väv immersion class, there's an overshot, which is cotton and linen, and just a lot of fun with colors there. And here's a very popular project in that class. This is a little piece of Väv, so the piece of leftover warp, and very simple equipment to make a lot of very crisp pattern. That's what Väv is kind of known for. And one more bit of leftover warp I got to weave off from the Väv immersion class. This is a piece of ticking. And so it's a cotton warp, 16-2 cotton warp, just a simple broken twill, a weft effect broken twill, so you see the back side is less brilliant. You see more of the weft on the front side here, and it just makes a really, really nice cushion cover, chair cover, some kind of upholstery fabric, however you want to use it. I might make a long bench cushion out of this one. We'll see. And then we get to this pile. So also through Fabric of Life last summer, we had a special guest teacher who, with me, we taught 2 weekend classes, and one was warping, comparative warping ways, the Scots and the Swedes. And so we had Justin Squazzaro here, who showed us the tradition he learned in, well, not in Scotland, but from a Scotsman, of how to warp with warping bars and with having multiple threads in your hand. So this whole pattern repeat of the colors, the threads were all in your hand at once, and he could make a cross this nifty way with his fingers. And so that was really fun to have Justin down here, and we could compare techniques, all these old tried and true techniques. And then I demonstrated a technique of warping where you can have a cross at both ends of the warping mill, and so you're winding, half of the mill is winding from here to here, but then the other half of the mill is winding from here to here. So it automatically comes out symmetrical. It's a great way to use up yarn. So I demonstrated using up a lot of little small quills. Not quills, they were tubes. Tubes of yarn, that's how it comes, on tubes. And so this was a warp face twill, the way I decided to weave it, so that these colors really show brilliantly. But this isn't all I did with the warp. I made 3 skirt panels, and there's one. I dropped the other 2, I forgot, I cut them apart. And so the way I made these all match is I made, I forget if it was 1 quill or 2, I think maybe 2 quills, all the same, with a little of this, and then I did that much of the red. I think I counted wraps on the quill with my bobbin winder, and so I could make matching sets of quills to do this border stripe. This is a weft-faced twill here, so a different tie-up, or you could have 4 treadles here and 4 there. You would have 8 treadles, a set of treadles for the weft face, a set of treadles for the warp face. But it's a really fun way to make a border, and so they should all match. So maybe next year during the exhibit I'll be wearing this dress. Who knows? It could happen. And we have one more pile here in this little segment. I might move these aside just because this will look better on the wood of the table. This is a little ruglet from our Mönster Parti class. So again, leftover warp from the class. And I did this little one too. So this is the same warp, just a different profile tie-up. So a small change in the tie-up to make the blocks weave differently together. And you see it's a pretty different pattern on each of these. And then part of the fun of the Mönster Parti class is we use the same, not only the same profile draft, just these big squares, but the same warp, different colors, and it's on 3 different looms, but exactly the same cotton warp. And we weave it 3 different ways. This is shadow weave. And I played the very end of the warp often is fun just to totally play around with. So I just was messing around, little bits of fabric, who knows what we'll do with that. And then the same warp slayed tighter, because for double weave it needs to be, the set needs to be a lot denser. I wove some different things on, that's kind of a fun one. And that was very kind of one shuttle. So it's the same color on both sides. It was very quick and easy. This was 2 shuttles. I was weaving different colors in the blocks on the different sides. And then this was just doing another kind of weird thing. So it gave you solid blocks on 3 on this side and 2 on that side. And I have the more normal samples already, but I'm adding those samples to my pile. There's a little bit of the rep warp left over, so I have that. So all 3 of these structures are really woven on the same warp. Cotton, same number of threads, alternating colors, just different things you can do with it. And then, oh, this one too, this is a square of the shadow weave, so you can see the whole shadow weave piece. And then these can turn into pillows later. They haven't yet, but this is also in the Mönster Parti class. Everyone has their own loom for this one project, and then they move around from loom to loom for the other projects. So you always have your own loom to go back to, so you're not ever having to wait for someone else. So these are these fun pillows, and this is all the same threading, just again a change in the tie-up, a subtle change in the tie-up in this case, to make all these different patterns happen. Bands are always one of my favorite things, and this has been a great year for band weaving for me, or year and a half, because I've been continuing to develop our Vävstuga Bandloom and our Vävstuga Bandloom class, and I have been working this winter on the Vävstuga Bandloom video class. And so I've really discovered some new things. I've just experimented with some new things that I'm eager to show you here, as well as old things. Here are some plain weave bands. And with the treadle on our Vävstuga Bandloom, it's just so nice and easy to whip out volumes of plain weave bands. So we have a few of those here and here. And then this one is what I do for the Vävstuga Bandloom class, just to learn how to use your hands to make this happen with your hands, as opposed to with the treadle, because those are good skills to have later on if you want to do the patterned weaving. And then we've got several bands here of what I call the simple pickup technique, where you only pick up every other shed. So here's a band that's just diamonds when I was just starting out with the Bandloom that I designed and testing the water, seeing what it could do. And that same warp, you can do all these fun little patterns. You can draw lines with it, and there's a diamond and more little lines, little hourglass. So this is just fun to explore with, and a little bit of picking up the other color, which is exciting. And then over here, you know, here is a spot I experimented with changing the weft color. Where do we see that? Here. So with a dark green weft, you can kind of see the patterns. With a white weft, you don't really see the patterns. But what happens if you use a red weft? Look at that. It makes the back side into something interesting rather than not so interesting. So that was kind of a fun experiment. And then for the video class, this was the warp I used in the video class. Starting with little diamonds, and then I go to other patterns. And so I explain about how you can design your own patterns using graph paper or not. You know what? This is upside down. Look at that. I showed you the other side. Let's start again. So, as we saw in the previous band, sometimes the back side looks good. It depends on what color you're weaving with. And here we can alternate colors and even patterns a little bit. And then I added some edge threads because I wanted to demonstrate how it can be really nice and better in some instances to use some border threads, especially if your pattern comes all the way out to the edge like this. There's a little tree, there's a little lady if you have some imagination. And then this red one is again the same kind of thing, but just playing with different lines yet again and different patterns. So you can be very creative with this. You can plan it ahead or not. Then this one, I had just originally meant this to be a plain weave band, and it's a warp that I put together a few years ago and never got around to weaving, and finally now when I put it on the loom I realized the center section I have alternating threads. So with that simple pickup technique I could put in little patterns, which I thought was just a fun touch. And then we have a few more bands of this technique. This one is 8-2 cotton, and I thought it's a really fun color play and pattern on the two sides, but a piece down the middle doesn't ever have any pattern pickup, so it just has a different look to it that way. And then this is a nice short pattern repeat, but very, very sweet band. And this one is in brage wool, so it's a little sticky, but I was experimenting with just more patterns. And here, this was an experiment in Mora yarn, using our fine wool yarn, and I wove an alphabet. And so that was kind of fun. And this was 16-2 linen. I wanted to try out some different materials. It's a very simple pickup pattern, just the floats repeating over and over. So very quick to weave because the pattern pickup is very simple. You're always picking up all of the threads. And this one is a related technique, but you're picking up on the outside, and then you're picking up the middle threads, and then the outside threads and the middle ones. This is 16-2 linen, and I put this band together just from leftover quills while I was up in a cabin in Maine where my husband and I go cross-country skiing. So I brought my Bandloom with me. And this is an interesting combination of materials. It's a linen rug warp and a cotton rug warp together. And this one was in the Raya yarn. So very chunky. I was just wanting to try out different materials. Now here's a band some of you have probably seen on our Mora Bandloom if you've been here. I finally finished it this year. So the weaving happened throughout many years, but I finally finished it. And then this one and this one, I'm going to bring these out this way, are the same warp, but I kept adding things to it. Originally I think I added the extra green threads because it was a simpler warp to start with, but I added green threads, and then for this one I added yellow threads. And these are done with the rigid heddle, but they could be done on the Vävstuga Bandloom. This band is the same technique. This I call kind of a classic pickup technique. You see it all over the Northern European countries and probably beyond. This is the band that comes with a booklet for our pattern spreader that fits on our Vävstuga Bandloom. And so I really walk you through step by step how to do this particular band. And it's also the one that I'm using in my video class to teach this technique. A very good way to start. And then this band was on my Vävstuga Bandloom as one of the first test warps, and I didn't get to weave very much of it, and it was sitting there for a few years. I finally finished it this year. It was a long warp. And then this was another that I was just testing out the pattern spreader. Both of these, I was testing out our pattern spreader early on and deciding it was really a great tool. It's an easy way to pick up these fancy patterns. It's easy on your hands, easy on your eyes, and so maybe you'll be intrigued by that. And then this was a band of tuna yarn. Now this was not so easy. These were the Mobilota, which is a slick, tight yarn. It was very sticky. That's really just the only word. I forced it to weave, but it was very sticky. And this is the Brage yarn, but combined with black 8-2 cotton. And that was a nice combination because the Brage is sticky all by itself, not as sticky as the tuna, but mixed with the cotton, it actually works pretty well. And here, this is kind of the grand finale. This was fun. I did this up in the cabin in Maine on our ski vacation evenings by the stove. And this is a combination of techniques. So here are these little border bits. Those are what I call the simple pickup technique, where you're only picking up going in one direction. But then here, these are the floats. This is more this technique of a big float going over 3 and under 3, over 3, under 3. And so I had one pattern saver saving all of these warp threads so I could either pull them down or lift them up. And so maybe if you're intrigued by that, you can check out my Bandloom video class, which is in the works right now, but hopefully out later this year. I am lucky enough in my home to have a loom that is 220 centimeters wide, and that's about 88 inches wide. And I've been busy doing a lot of things, so this has often been on the back burner. This warp probably had been on my loom over 10 years. But I finally managed to get it off, so this just keeps coming. It's a white warp, and so I did this kind of damask tablecloth. I'll just lay it out here. Why not? Because it's so big. There it is. So this was an 8-shaft damask, a straight twill. And this one I did second, actually. Before that, I did do just a nice big white tablecloth. This one's even a little bit bigger, I think. But I spent a lot of time just sitting there waiting for me to get to it. And so here you can see the profile design maybe a little better because it's just the 2 colors. But look how wide. I do have a fly shuttle on this loom, so this was woven with a fly shuttle. And I'll spread it out here as a backdrop for the rest of this segment's offerings. There we go. It's on the floor over here. It's really long. Tuck it under there. Okay, so big tablecloths finally finished over 10 years later. And this is kind of cheating because this rug was woven more than a year and a half ago, but I did the fringe recently. And so this was just kind of a fun, you can see the different colors in the warp, which you can kind of see in the stripes. And it was an inlay technique, actually a clasped weft. So this weft folds around that one and it joins and then it comes out. So sometimes projects do finally get finished. Don't despair. If you have projects sitting around to finish, you'll get to them when you're good and ready. And I'm just set this over here for now because we can bring out these linens and draw loom. These are linens not on the draw loom. And the story behind these is that some of you may know Lisa Hill. She's taught here sometimes, but she travels all around to teach. And she came to do in our linens class, this is 28 singles linen in the warp. and also in the weft here, but this one is a hand spun weft. And so there was some extra warp that I did those. And then this, I have to laugh, this is again a warp that might be 10 years old or more, which I did for my linens class for many years, but then I finally realized I have to weave off the rest of this warp. And so my teaching assistant here at Vävstuga, Eva, also wove some of this. This is all hand spun weft in this one. And this one, the darker color, is hand spun weft. So just the linens are so exciting to do with the hand spinning. And that brings us to draw loom items. First of which I'm going to show you is all linen. This is a fun little bit of damask on a straight pattern threading. So pattern shafts in a straight threading. So it's not symmetrical, but you get repeats going across. And then there, of course, is the other side. Maybe the green side, since it's a plant. Maybe that's the side to use. I don't know what that's going to be. It's just an unfinished piece of fabric right now. But on that same warp, look what you can do on the same warp. Same idea, 3 repeats across that are not symmetrical. So it's a straight pattern threading on the pattern shafts. But then these were X shafts here, if that means something to you. It means these were not on pattern shafts. So it's how you get more bang for your buck without wasting pattern shafts. But these little guys change colors as they go, and then they change back. And this is a fence, supposed to be a fence around the edge. They are fenced in, poor things. Little fence posts. And then, what should we look at next? Oh, this was a warp that we made for someone, and then they couldn't come to the class, and literally this warp was pre-slayed, ready to be beamed onto a loom for, I think, about 3 years. We finally beamed it onto a loom, and all of us here at Vävstuga did a little different something. This is again a straight threading. So these are my laundry line. I've got a bunch of pants here and socks, and that's supposed to be a laundry basket. I don't know if it works. Here's a little shirt. But then you have the cats here chasing the mice, and they're just running back and forth between the laundry. I'm not sure how successful that was, but it was fun to play around with. Let's move then to this. This is the shaft draw damask as we've been looking at, but this is with a pointed threading. And this is just a pointed threading on 10 shafts. So we have symmetrical things, still 3 repeats across, but they're all symmetrical patterns going across and using different colors. That was kind of fun. On that same warp, same setup, just using one color to weave with. This is a pattern that I borrowed from a sweater of mine, actually. Drafted it out from a sweater. I think it was a Scandinavian sweater. And we've got these two are from the same warp. There was a little bit of a setup. This was 21 pattern shafts. And a lot of these patterns, actually all of these patterns, are from Katie Meek's book, The Flaxen Past, which we have in our store. We just got a lot of those in. Just beautiful patterns in 21 pattern shafts. But then I decided to change the pattern threading. You can do that midstream on a warp. You can take all the pattern shafts out and start over, re-divvy them up. And I used fewer pattern shafts. I can't remember how many this was. It might have been 14 or 11, I don't know. But it's a straight pattern threading, so straight, 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 as opposed to this is a pointed one. Those are symmetrical patterns. And so 2 very different pieces from the same warp, which is always fun to see. And then one more in this, and this was a fun thing to do. This was set up as a pointed threading with 30-something pattern shafts. But I decided I wanted to try doing one of these nice block weaves that I've always coveted. I think this is 9 blocks. And so 9 blocks times 6 is a lot of shafts, 54 shafts. So we don't have a loom that's going to do 54 shafts. But you can do these beautiful block designs on the draw loom. And we could have done this with just 9 pattern shafts. I left the 30, whatever they were on there, and I just pull several handles at once. And it works, but I really had fun with the colors in this. So it's a 9 shaft, a 9 block pattern, but I used a bunch of colors. And keep an eye out for this, because this might be a warp to go at some point for a draw loom. And if you're interested in that, just give me a nudge and it will make me get there sooner. I have one more thing to show. This is an unfinished piece. We'll look at them last. Those are the porcupines. But here's a tablecloth. But I thought it'd be fun to show you how far I've gotten with it, because I've done other tablecloths like this. This is an Opempta tablecloth, and it's got 21 pattern shafts, and these are patterns from Katie Meek's book, A Flaxen Past, which we've just recently got a lot more copies of in our store, so check that out. Just some beautiful patterns. And so I've woven with a stripe, a border stripe here, and a little inside stripe, but then I've woven extra stripes, and I've cut these out and ironed them a bit with the edges turned under. But you see how that's going to go there. I have to figure out exactly where they get placed, but it's an applique, so you can make these extra stripes as all appliques. And once I sew it all together, it will look a little more like that, except it's supposed to be a square in the middle. So you see, I have to place it and figure it out. But it's just a fun way to make a nice square tablecloth out of those patterns. On the same loom, I designed these little porcupines. This might be trimming on a piece of clothing. I'm not sure exactly what it's going to be, but I thought they were just so fun and sweet. And who knows what this next year will bring as far as woven pieces, but I hope to see you back at this exhibit next year. But thank you so much for checking out this and staying to the bitter end of this 1.5-year exhibit of what I've woven in the last many months. And we hope to see you either here in person or check out our video classes online if that's easier for you. And hope you have a great year and good weaving days to come.